Chapter 1. The House of Silent Echoes. The evening mist curled around the towering hedges of Greystone Manor, shrouding the estate in an eerie, ghostly hush. A single light flickered in the drawing-room, casting long shadows against the heavy velvet drapes. Inside, the remnants of an interrupted dinner lay untouched on fine china, as if the occupants had suddenly abandoned their meal. The air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke, mingling with the faint perfume of roses, a contrast to the chilling silence that had fallen over the house. It was at precisely 8:47 p.m. when the scream shattered the stillness. A cry so sharp, so filled with terror, that it sent the entire household rushing towards the grand oak staircase. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, mistress of Greystone Manor, stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, her hand clutching the banister with a grip so tight her knuckles turned white. "Upstairs," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It came from Lawrence's study. When the door was thrown open, the scene inside was one of impossibility. Sir Lawrence Whitcomb, renowned collector of rare antiquities, lay sprawled on the Ushiwa Persian rug, lifeless. His body had collapsed beside his desk, his once proud face twisted in an expression of shock. But it was not the manner of his death that defied explanation. It was the mystery of his murderer's escape. The large windows behind his desk were bolted shut from the inside. The only door to the study had been locked when they arrived, forcing them to break it open. And yet, the strangest detail was the footprints. A clear set of footprints led to Sir Lawrence's desk, but none led away, as if the killer had vanished into thin air. Lady Eleanor let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth. The gathered guests murmured in hushed tones, fear creeping into their voices. Dr. Charles Rendell, the family physician, bent down to examine the body. No sign of forced entry, no weapon in sight, and yet he is most assuredly dead. His tone was grim. "We must summon the authorities." But it was not the police who arrived first. Exactly 1 hour later, a figure stepped through the threshold of Greystone Manor. A man of impeccable dress, with a waxed moustache as precise as the arch of his brows. His polished shoes barely made a sound against the marble floor as he surveyed the room with careful scrutiny. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, "I am Hercule Poirot, and it appears we have a most fascinating puzzle before us." His sharp green eyes landed on the study door, then the footprints that led to nowhere. He sighed, pressing his fingertips together. "Ah," he murmured, "c'est très curieux. A locked room, a dead man, and footsteps that betray no exit." Poirot's gaze flickered toward the assembled guests. "Bon, shall we begin?" Chapter 2. The Little Grey Cells. Awaken the silence inside Greystone Manor was thick with tension, as Hercule Poirot removed his gloves with a precise, deliberate motion. His eyes, keen and perceptive, scanned the stunned faces of those gathered. The weight of Sir Lawrence Whitcomb's inexplicable death loomed over them like a dark cloud, yet Poirot remained utterly composed. He turned to the household's butler, a gaunt man with an air of quiet efficiency. "Mon ami, I assume you are the one who ensures order in this house. Your name, if you please." The butler inclined his head. "Merton, sir." "Très bien, Merton. Now, if you would be so kind, Who was present in the house at the time of the murder? Merton hesitated for a moment before listing the occupants in his deep, steady voice. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb, the widow, Mr. Albert Whitcomb, the victim's younger brother, Miss Celeste Whitcomb, his niece, Dr. Charles Rendell, the family physician, Mr. Oliver Grant, a long-time friend of the deceased, Mr. Henry Mercer, Sir Lawrence's solicitor, and myself, sir. Poirot nodded. 7 individuals, including yourself. And no one else entered or left the house this evening? No one, sir, Merton affirmed. You damned slim. Poirot turned his gaze toward the body of Sir Lawrence Whitcomb, lying motionless beside the grand mahogany desk. He stepped closer, his polished shoes making barely a whisper against the Persian rug. He knelt, examining the position of the body with meticulous care. Sir Lawrence's right hand was curled slightly, as though he had grasped at something before death had claimed him. His eyes were open, frozen in an expression of bewildered horror. Poirot traced a finger lightly over the desk's surface, noting that several papers had been disturbed, as if there had been a struggle, or as if something had been taken. But Poirot's gaze rested longest on the footprints. The perfectly imprinted marks in the thick carpet only led toward the desk, never away from it. They were deep and well-defined, suggesting a deliberate and measured pace. Someone had walked in, but no second set of prints indicated a departure. Poirot pursed his lips. Ah, and so the footprints reveal a most intriguing paradox. Oliver Grant, a lean man with greying temples and a nervous disposition, let out an anxious laugh. Paradox? It's impossible, that's what it is. The killer walked in but never walked out. He didn't just vanish into thin air, Poirot. Poirot straightened, smoothing the front of his impeccably tailored suit. Impossible, monsieur. No, nothing is impossible. Only our understanding is limited. But tell me, who found the body? It was Lady Eleanor, Dr. Rendell answered. He was a broad-shouldered man, his sharp eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses. We were in the dining room when we heard the scream. She rushed upstairs first, and we followed soon after. The door was locked, so Mr. Whitcomb and I had to force it open. Poirot turned his gaze to Lady Eleanor. She stood near the window, her arms folded tightly around herself, as if warding off a chill. Though she was composed, there was a faint tremor in her hands. Madame, Poirot said gently, you were the first to arrive at the scene, yes? She nodded. Yes, I had gone upstairs to fetch something from my room. I was just outside my door when I heard the most— She shuddered, pressing a hand to her chest. Awful sound, a gasp, a choking gasp, as if someone were struggling for breath. And then silence. Poirot inclined his head. And the door to Sir Lawrence's study, was it locked when you arrived? Yes. Her voice was firmer now. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I screamed. Albert Whitcomb, a stout man with a ruddy complexion, interjected impatiently, Poirot, this is all well and good, but what are you driving at? You've seen the room. No one could have gotten out. The door was locked, and the windows were bolted. He gestured toward the heavy drapes. Unless you think the killer grew wings and flew away. Poirot sighed, shaking his head. Ah, mon cher monsieur, you make the mistake of believing that what the eyes see is always the truth. But no, the truth is more subtle. It is found in what we do not see. Albert scowled. And what, pray, don't we see? Poirot gestured to the footprints. You do not see the footprints leading away. And yet the body is here, oui? The footprints tell a story, but it is not the story we assume. Celeste Whitcomb, a striking young woman with dark hair and a sceptical expression, crossed her arms. And what story do they tell, Poirot? Poirot gave a small smile. That, mademoiselle, we shall soon uncover. The first round of interviews. With the body examined and the preliminary observations made, Poirot moved into the drawing-room, where he seated himself in an armchair, with the poise of a man who had already begun to see the shape of the puzzle. Before him, he gestured to Lady Eleanor. "Madame, I should like to begin with you." Lady Eleanor sat stiffly across from him. "What do you wish to know?" "Tell me about Sir Lawrence. Had he been anxious in recent days? Uneasy?" She hesitated. Yes, he had received a letter earlier this week that disturbed him. I asked him about it, but he brushed it off as business matters. "A letter? Do you know who sent it?" "No. He destroyed it immediately." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. "A man does not destroy a letter unless it contains something he does not wish others to see." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "Lawrence was secretive. He had many dealings I was not privy to. But if you are asking whether I believe he had enemies, then yes, I believe he did." Poirot studied her carefully. "And what were you doing before you heard the scream?" "I had been in my room. I left to go downstairs when I heard that dreadful sound." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, making a mental note before turning to Albert Whitcomb. "Monsieur Whitcomb, you are the younger brother of the deceased, yes?" Albert grunted. "I am." "And your relationship with Sir Lawrence, how would you describe it?" Albert shifted uncomfortably. "We had differences. Differences of what nature?" Albert hesitated before muttering, "Financial." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, and tonight, monsieur, where were you before the scream?" "I was in the dining-room, like everyone else." Poirot nodded, then turned to Celeste Whitcomb. "Mademoiselle, what about you?" Celeste's dark eyes narrowed. "Do you suspect me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Ah, suspicion is a word too strong. I merely seek the truth." She exhaled. "I was in the dining-room as well. We were all there." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And yet, mes amis, a man is dead upstairs. If you were all in the dining-room, then who killed him?" A silence fell over the room. Poirot smiled. "Bon, the little grey cells are awakening." Final observations. After completing the first round of interviews, Poirot excused himself to inspect the study once more. He paced the room, his gaze lingering on the footprints. Then his eyes flicked towards something that had been overlooked before. The fireplace. A thin layer of ash had been disturbed. Poirot knelt and carefully ran a gloved finger along the edge. Something had been burned here recently. He straightened, his mind racing. A letter destroyed, a locked room, footprints that led to nowhere. The answer was already forming in his mind, and yet one crucial piece remained, missing, for now. Chapter 3. A Trail of Vanishing Clues. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Greyston Manor, illuminating the dust particles that floated in the air, as though disturbed by unseen hands. The household remained gripped in an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Hercule Poirot sat at the breakfast table, the crisp white linen perfectly arranged, the fine china before him untouched. Fingers tapped gently against his cup, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Chief Inspector Bernard Graves of Scotland Yard sipped his coffee with a look of evident fatigue. "This one's got the mark of an impossible crime," Graves muttered, rubbing his temple. "A locked room, a murder with no apparent weapon, and footprints leading in but not out. And I assume you've already formed a theory, Poirot." Poirot gave a small, satisfied smile. "Ah, mon ami, a theory? Non, I do not deal in theories, I deal in facts." Graves exhaled heavily. "Then what do the facts tell you?" Poirot dabbed his lips delicately with a napkin, before setting it down with precision. "They tell me that we are being misled." Bitz frowned. "Misled? How so?" Poirot folded his hands neatly on the table. "Consider, mon cher, what we have observed. Sir Lawrence was found dead, the study door locked from the inside. There are footprints leading to his desk, but none leading away. A letter, which alarmed him greatly, was burned in the fireplace. And yet, despite these most intriguing details, the obvious is being hidden from us." Graves grunted. "And what is the obvious?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "That the crime scene was arranged to deceive us. A false lead emerges." By midday, the air inside Greystone Manor had grown tense. Poirot had requested another round of individual conversations with the household, and as they gathered once more in the drawing-room, he observed them carefully. It was then that Henry Mercer, Sir Lawrence's solicitor, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I believe I may have something of importance," he announced. His voice wavered slightly, though whether from nerves or something else, Poirot could not yet tell. "Speak, monsieur," Poirot said, watching him closely. Mercer hesitated before producing a folded letter from his pocket. "I was going through Sir Lawrence's documents this morning, ensuring that his estate was in order. I found this in one of his locked drawers." Poirot took the letter delicately, unfolding it. His eyes skimmed the contents, and his lips pursed. "Lawrence, you know what you must do. If you do not act soon, others will suffer the consequences. You cannot ignore the past forever. The price of silence is blood." H.R. Poirot held the letter between two fingers, his mind rapidly processing the implications. Albert Whitcomb, who had been pacing, stopped abruptly. "H.R. Who the devil is H.R.?" Oliver Grant's face had turned slightly pale. A threat. Someone was blackmailing him. Poirot lifted a finger. "Ah, but let us not assume too quickly, mon ami. The letter does not demand money. It demands an action. That is quite different." Celeste Whitcomb crossed her arms. "So this H.R. wanted my uncle to do something. But what?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That is the question, mademoiselle." He turned to Mercer. "Monsieur, do you recognize this handwriting?" Mercer frowned. "No, I don't believe so. But Sir Lawrence was a man of many secrets. He had dealings with people he rarely spoke of." Poirot turned the letter over, inspecting the edges. The paper was rough, of a cheaper quality than the fine stationery Sir Lawrence typically used. The ink was slightly smudged. Graves stepped closer. "Does this mean our mysterious H.R. is the killer?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze moved from the letter to the assembled group. Watching for reactions, Lady Eleanor remained composed, though she clutched the armrest of her chair tightly. Albert Whitcomb seemed restless, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Celeste kept her expression neutral, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Oliver Grant looked deeply troubled. Poirot finally spoke. "It is a possibility, but possibilities do not make the truth." The missing timepiece that afternoon, Poirot returned to the study, alone this time. He moved with great care, his eyes scanning every detail of the room. The grand mahogany desk remained as it had been, the chair slightly pushed back, as if Lawrence had risen abruptly before his death. Poirot's fingers trailed over the items on the desk. A ledger, an ink bottle, a half-filled glass of brandy, a pocket watch. Poirot paused. A pocket watch. His brows knit together as he studied the timepiece. It was silver, its face cracked, the hands frozen at 10:12. Poirot's mind sharpened. He distinctly remembered that Sir Lawrence had always carried a gold pocket watch, a family heirloom, and yet this was not the same watch. Poirot lifted it carefully, turning it over. The back bore an engraving. H.R.A. slow smile spread across his lips. "Ah, mon cher assassin, you have made a mistake." The psychological game begins. That evening, Poirot gathered the household once more. The fire crackled in the drawing-room, casting flickering shadows against the walls. He stood before them, the silver pocket watch resting on his palm. "I have made an observation most curious," Poirot began, his tone light but purposeful. "Sir Lawrence always carried a gold pocket watch, and yet this silver one was found on his desk." Oliver Grant leaned forward. "So, maybe he owned two watches." Poirot shook his head. "Non, a man like Sir Lawrence, he was a creature of habit. He prized his possessions. He would never exchange his gold heirloom for a silver trinket." Albert frowned. "Then where is his real watch?" Poirot let the question hang in the air before answering softly. "Perhaps with the murderer." A visible shift passed through the group. Poirot noted the subtle reactions. The way Lady Eleanor tensed, the way Mercer's lips pressed together, the way Celeste's fingers curled into fists. Poirot continued. "Now, mes amis, let us consider our mysterious H.R. This watch bears those very initials, and yet no one here claims to know an H.R. He let the silence stretch before he said, "But what if H.R. is not a name, but initials that stand for something else?" A flicker of uncertainty passed across Celeste's face. Poirot saw it. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he said gently, "does the name Hollingsworth and Rains mean anything to you?" Her breath hitched. There, the reaction he was looking for, that was. She hesitated. "That was my father's company, before he died." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, then perhaps we have our connection." Lady Eleanor paled. "But that company went bankrupt years ago. What would it have to do with Lawrence's murder?" Poirot's smile widened. "That, madame, is what we must uncover." The next steps. The night wore on. Poirot retired to his room, his mind alight with possibilities. The silver watch, the burned letter, the initials HR, and their link to Celeste's father's company. The footprints that led in, but not out. Everything was beginning to form a picture of deception, revenge, and a carefully orchestrated illusion, but there was still a missing piece. Poirot poured himself a cup of tea, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the porcelain. Tomorrow he would set his final trap, and then the murderer would have nowhere left to hide. Chapter 4. A Web of Deception. The following morning, Greystone Manor awoke under a veil of uncertainty. The household's usual routine was in disarray. Conversations were hushed, glances were stolen, and every movement seemed weighted with an unspoken fear. The presence of Hercule Poirot, with his unerring gaze and meticulous manner, had unsettled everyone. Poirot himself, however, was entirely at ease. He had just finished his breakfast, sitting perfectly upright as he sipped his tea, his little grey cells diligently arranging the puzzle pieces before him. Chief Inspector Graves, less composed, sat across from him, frowning over a stack of notes. "Poirot, I'm beginning to think this case will drive me mad," Graves muttered, rubbing his forehead. "We have a locked-room murder, a missing pocket watch, and now these initials, HR, connecting to a bankrupt company. What do they all mean?" Poirot smiled slightly. "Patience, mon ami. The mind must be like a fine tapestry. Each thread must be woven in order to see the full picture." Graves sighed. "And what's our next step, then?" Poirot placed his cup down with precision. "We must untangle the past. Hollingsworth and Rains holds a key to this mystery, but we must determine why." A hidden chapter from the past Poirot's inquiries led him to Sir Lawrence's personal study, a room lined with leather-bound books and filled with the scent of aged paper and pipe smoke. Mercer, the solicitor, stood nervously by the desk, flipping through a ledger. "Mercer," Poirot said smoothly, "I require access to all documents pertaining to Sir Lawrence's financial dealings, particularly anything referencing Hollingsworth and Rains." Mercer hesitated. "Poirot, I don't know if that's necessary. The company—" Poirot raised a hand. "Monsieur, nothing is unnecessary in the pursuit of truth." Mercer exhaled, sharply, but unlocked a drawer and handed over a faded yellowing folder. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside, he found a series of transactions dating back nearly 20 years. Sir Lawrence had made several large payments to Hollingsworth and Rains before its collapse. The amounts were significant, far beyond a mere business investment. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Curious, Graves peered over his shoulder. "What do you make of it?" Poirot tapped a finger against one of the documents. Sir Lawrence was not merely an investor. He was paying for something. He turned the page and froze. A contract, signed by both Sir Lawrence and the former owner of Hollingsworth and Rains, Charles Whitcomb. Poirot's little grey cells sparked. Charles Whitcomb, Celeste's father. A connection had just solidified. A secret buried in time. Poirot wasted no time in calling Celeste to the study. She entered with measured steps, her expression composed, but Poirot noted the tension in her hands. "Miss Whitcomb," Poirot said gently, I must ask you about your father." Celeste stiffened. "What about him?" Poirot slid the contract across the desk. "Were you aware that your father had business dealings with Sir Lawrence?" Her eyes widened. "No. I knew he once owned Hollingsworth and Raines, but he never spoke of business matters. He lost everything when the company went under. He never recovered." Poirot observed her carefully. "Mademoiselle, what if I told you that Sir Lawrence did not merely invest in your father's company, but paid him for something specific?" Celeste swallowed hard. "Paid him? For what?" Poirot leaned forward. "I believe the answer to that question is why Sir Lawrence was murdered." She looked genuinely bewildered. "But I don't understand." Poirot sighed. "The past always catches up with us, mademoiselle, and someone has been waiting a long time for justice." A psychological trap. That evening, Poirot made a calculated decision. It was time to apply pressure. He arranged for all the suspects to gather in the drawing-room, his sharp gaze flicking between them as they took their seats. The fire crackled behind him, casting flickering shadows across the room. Poirot spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Mes amis, it is time to tell you what I know." He let the words hang in the air. The tension in the room deepened. Poirot continued. "Sir Lawrence was not merely a wealthy man. He carried a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect." Lady Eleanor's grip tightened on her chair's armrest. Albert Whitcomb shifted uncomfortably. Oliver Grant looked down. Mercer adjusted his glasses. Poirot continued. "Many years ago, Sir Lawrence made a payment, a very large payment, to Hollingsworth and Raines, owned by Charles Whitcomb." A sharp intake of breath came from Celeste. Poirot turned his gaze toward her. "Mademoiselle Whitcomb, I do not believe your father simply went bankrupt. I believe something far more sinister occurred." Celeste's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you saying?" Poirot's tone remained gentle. "Your father was paid off to keep quiet about something, and I believe Sir Lawrence lived in fear that someone would one day uncover what that was." A heavy silence followed. Poirot let it stretch before he delivered his final statement. "And someone in this room already knew the truth." The real killer reacts. A sharp gasp came from Oliver Grant. Poirot's gaze immediately locked onto him. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "Monsieur Grant, why do you react so?" Oliver's hands had curled into fists. "That's absurd." Poirot took a step forward. "No, it is not, because I have also discovered something else." He withdrew a small scrap of burnt paper from his pocket, retrieved earlier from the study's fireplace. "I had this analyzed. Though much was lost to the flames, I was able to make out a single phrase." Poirot held the scrap up. "It reads, 'You took everything from me.'" Poirot's gaze bore into Oliver's. "You knew the truth about Sir Lawrence, did you not?" Oliver's face had paled. "That's ridiculous. I barely knew him." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but you knew Charles Whitcomb. You knew the real reason Hollingsworth and Raines collapsed." Oliver's eyes darted to Celeste, then to Albert. "This is insane. Poirot held up a single finger. "I have just one question, monsieur. Where were you precisely at the time of Sir Lawrence's murder?" Oliver opened his mouth, hesitated, and that was enough. Poirot's expression was triumphant. "You cannot answer, can you? Because you were there." Oliver's chest rose and fell rapidly. Poirot took another step forward. "And, mon ami, you made one very great mistake." Oliver's voice cracked. "What mistake?" Poirot lifted the silver pocket-watch. "This is not Sir Lawrence's watch. It belonged to the man who sought revenge, a man whose past was destroyed by a secret, a man who wanted to expose the truth." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A man like you, monsieur!" Oliver bolted from his seat. Graves and 2 constables lunged forward, seizing him before he could escape. Poirot's voice was calm, almost pitying. "Mon cher Oliver, did you really think you could fool Hercule Poirot?" A heavy silence followed, and in that moment the truth was undeniable. The game was over. Oliver Grant was the murderer. Chapter 5. The Secrets of the Past. A sharp silence settled over the drawing-room of Greystone Manor as Oliver Grant stood frozen. And then you entered the manor through a side entrance. No one saw you. You moved quietly to the study, where Sir Lawrence was sitting at his desk, unaware of your presence. Poirot turned to Oliver. You confronted him. Did you not? You told him the truth, that you knew about his betrayal, about the lives he had ruined, and when he tried to dismiss you, tried to turn you away, you shot him. Oliver flinched, but Poirot pressed on. You took a single precise shot to his chest, clean, calculated, professional. You wanted justice, or at least your version of it. Poirot's gaze sharpened, and then you planted the pocket-watch near his body, a red herring designed to send the investigation in the wrong direction, a deception worthy of a master. But alas, you are not a master, monsieur. Oliver's fists clenched. And what proof do you have? Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. The most damning proof of all. The truth. And then Poirot held up an object. A single glove. The blood drained from Oliver's face. Poirot turned the glove over. Inside, stitched neatly into the lining, were the initials O.G. Oliver's initials. Poirot's voice was almost regretful. You dropped this, mon cher. A single careless mistake. Oliver's face twisted in fury. You think you're so clever, don't you? He spat. Poirot sighed. It is not a matter of cleverness. It is simply a matter of seeing what is already there. Oliver's shoulders slumped. He let out a slow, shuddering breath. And then, finally, he whispered, Fine, I killed him. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. Graves stepped forward. Oliver Grant, you are under arrest. The constables pulled Oliver to his feet. He did not resist. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. His expression was unreadable. And just like that, the case was solved. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. Oliver Grant was led away by the constables. A heavy silence filled the grand drawing-room of Greystone Manor. The air, once thick with tension and deception, now carried the weight of something far heavier. Truth. Chief Inspector Graves exhaled sharply and turned to Poirot. Well, that's it then. The case is wrapped up. But Poirot did not respond immediately. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his head tilted ever so slightly, as if listening to something unheard by the rest of them. His little grey cells were still at work, even as the official conclusion had seemingly been reached. Lady Eleanor shifted uneasily. Monsieur Poirot, is something the matter?" Poirot's lips pursed. He turned, scanning the faces around him. Lady Eleanor, Celeste Whitcomb, Thomas Harcourt, and Mr. Farnsworth. Each wore an expression of relief, but there was something else too, something that sent a prickle of unease down Poirot's spine. He took a step forward. "Ah, mon ami Graves, you are quick to close the book, but I am not so hasty. There is still one thing that does not sit right." Graves frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. "Jiffin, Grant committed the murder, yes, that much is clear. But there is a missing piece, something vital that we have all overlooked." The room stiffened. Celeste spoke hesitantly. "But you just solved the case, Monsieur Poirot. What else could be missing?" Poirot turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "Mademoiselle, in any crime there are two questions that must be answered. Not just who committed it, but also why. And in this case, the why remains incomplete." Celeste frowned. "But you said Oliver killed Sir Lawrence because of his past betrayal. Yes, that is what Oliver himself believes." Poirot paused. "But I wonder, was he merely a pawn in a larger game?" A murmur spread through the group. Graves folded his arms. "Poirot, are you suggesting there's someone else involved?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I am suggesting, mon ami, that the crime is not as simple as it appears." The vanishing letter Poirot turned to the fireplace where the remnants of a burnt letter lay scattered in the grate. "Let us consider something peculiar. This letter." He gestured to the burnt scraps. "Oliver claimed that Sir Lawrence destroyed a letter before he killed him. But what if Oliver never read that letter in full? What if there was something in it? Something Sir Lawrence was desperate to hide?" Thomas Harcourt stiffened. "But it was burnt." Poirot gave a small smile. "Ah, but even burnt paper leaves behind whispers of its message." From his pocket he retrieved a small slip of partially charred parchment. He held it up, scrawled faintly across the paper, in ink that had barely survived the flames, were the words, "If the truth comes out, all shall be ruined. It must remain buried, even at the cost of my own life." A shocked silence followed. Poirot placed the fragment carefully on the table. "Sir Lawrence did not burn this letter to hide his crimes from Oliver. No, mes amis, he burnt it to protect someone else." Lady Eleanor's hand trembled as she brought it to her lips, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hands of the constables gripped his arms firmly, preventing any last-ditch attempt at escape. His eyes darted between Poirot and the assembled suspects, as if searching for an avenue of denial, an escape route, a single shadow of doubt he could exploit, but there was none. Poirot stood before him, hands neatly clasped, his gaze unyielding. "It is finished, Monsieur Grant. The truth will out, as it always does." Chief Inspector Graves stepped forward, his face set in a grim expression. "Oliver Grant, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Sir Lawrence Harcourt." For a moment Oliver remained silent. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound that reverberated in the tense air. "Arrest me," he scoffed. "And what exactly do you charge me with? A scrap of paper from a fireplace? A missing pocket watch? You have no real proof." Poirot sighed, shaking his head. "Mon cher, If you are to lie, you must do so convincingly. But I fear your talent for deception is sorely lacking." He took a step closer, his voice gentle, but firm. "You made 3 critical mistakes." Oliver's eyes narrowed. "Mistakes?" Poirot held up a single finger. 1. You reacted far too strongly when I mentioned Sir Lawrence's financial dealings with Hollingsworth and Rains. Why would that upset you unless you already knew? He raised a second finger. 2. The pocket watch you left near the crime scene. You meant for it to be discovered, did you not? A planted clue to send us down the wrong path. But you miscalculated. Sir Lawrence never owned such a watch. It belonged to someone else entirely." Oliver swallowed hard, but said nothing. Poirot lifted his third finger. "And 3, you did not account for the footprints." Oliver stiffened. Poirot's voice remained calm. "The footprints in the snow, leading towards Sir Lawrence's study, but vanishing before they could reach it. A perfect trick, no? But even the cleverest of deceptions can be undone by the simplest of observations." He turned to Graves. "Inspector, permit me to reconstruct the crime." Graves nodded grimly. "Go ahead, Poirot." Poirot gestured to the chairs in the drawing-room. "All of you, sit. The great detective shall reveal all." A murmur passed through the group, but one by one they obeyed, settling into their seats as Poirot took centre stage. Reconstructing the murder, Poirot smoothed the front of his jacket and began. At precisely 8:30 p.m. last night, Sir Lawrence Harcourt was alive and well in his study. By 9 at 9 p.m. he was dead. A shot fired directly into his chest, execution style at close range. The killer fled the scene, leaving behind only a mystery. He paced slowly. But let us go back further, to the events that led to this murder. Many years ago, Sir Lawrence was involved in a secret deal with Hollingsworth and Rains, a company owned by Charles Whitcomb, Celeste's father. The details of that transaction were buried, but one man knew the truth. His gaze flicked to Oliver. "You, Monsieur Grant." Oliver exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. Poirot nodded. "You see, mes amis, Monsieur Grant was no ordinary businessman. No, he was a man with a vendetta. A man who lost everything when Hollingsworth and Rains collapsed. And why? Because of a betrayal." Celeste gasped. "A betrayal?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle. Sir Lawrence's secret payment was not an investment. It was hush money. Money paid to silence your father, to ensure that the world never discovered the fraudulent dealings that led to the collapse of Hollingsworth and Rains." Celeste paled. "You mean my father wasn't responsible?" Poirot's voice softened. "No, mademoiselle. Your father was the scapegoat. The real culprit, the one who arranged for Hollingsworth and Rains to fall, was Sir Lawrence himself." A stunned silence followed. Poirot continued. Oliver Grant was one of the many people who suffered because of that collapse. His family, once prosperous, was ruined overnight. He never forgot what had been done. And when he realized the truth about Sir Lawrence's betrayal, he planned his revenge. Oliver's breathing quickened, but he remained silent. Poirot clasped his hands. "Last night you enacted your plan, did you not, Monsieur Grant?" Oliver's mouth twisted. "I don't know what you're talking about." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but you do. Allow me to describe exactly how you committed the crime." The final steps of the murder. Poirot began to pace, his voice measured. You first ensured that Sir Lawrence would be alone. You observed his habits, knew he worked late in his study. Then you prepared your deception. The footprints, Oliver's. Eyes flickered. Poirot continued. You walked carefully towards Sir Lawrence's study, but you did not actually enter. You stopped just before the door, then walked backward in your own tracks, creating the illusion that someone had approached, but never left. A gasp came from Lady Eleanor. Poirot nodded. The footprints, that led to nowhere. Poirot held up a single finger. But who? Poirot's gaze shifted slowly, deliberately, toward one person in the room, Celeste Whitcomb. She inhaled sharply. Me? Poirot nodded. Mademoiselle, I believe your father's dealings with Sir Lawrence were not merely financial. There was something deeper, something that made Sir Lawrence afraid, not of exposure, but of retribution. And I suspect, my dear Celeste, that you already know what that is. Celeste's face turned pale. I don't... Poirot stepped forward. You loved your father, did you not? She nodded weakly. Of course I did. Poirot's voice softened. And when he died, did you never question how it happened? The room went still. Thomas Harcourt frowned. I thought Celeste's father died of an illness. Poirot glanced at him. Did he? A slow, creeping dread spread through the room. Celeste's lips parted, her breath shallow. You mean, you think my father didn't die naturally? Poirot inclined his head. I do not think, mademoiselle. I know. A gasp escaped her lips. Poirot pressed on. Your father did not fall to illness, Celeste. He was murdered, and I believe Sir Lawrence Harcourt had a hand in it. Lady Eleanor let out a soft cry. My God! Celeste's hands balled into fists. No, no, that can't be true. Poirot met her gaze. It is true, mademoiselle, and I believe you have always suspected it. Celeste's shoulders trembled. Poirot's voice was gentle, but firm. Till me, mademoiselle? Did you send the anonymous letter that lured Oliver Grant here? Celeste gasped. Graves straightened. An anonymous letter? Poirot nodded. Yes, mon ami. Someone sent Oliver Grant an anonymous letter, telling him that Sir Lawrence had been responsible for his family's downfall. Someone planted the idea of revenge in his mind. Someone set this entire tragedy in motion. He looked at Celeste. It was you, was it not? A deathly silence fell. Celeste's lips trembled. I... Tears welled in her eyes. Poirot's voice softened. It was you. Celeste let out a sob. She covered her face with her hands. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, I sent the letter. Graves' eyes widened. Good Lord! Celeste looked up, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for anyone to die, I swear. I only wanted justice. I just wanted Oliver to know the truth. Poirot nodded solemnly. I believe you, mademoiselle. But in your pursuit of justice, you became an instrument of vengeance. You gave a wounded man a reason to kill. Celeste collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Graves exhaled sharply. So, Oliver pulled the trigger, but Celeste set the events in motion. Poirot nodded, and Sir Lawrence Harcourt. He was not an innocent victim, mon ami. He was a man who lived in fear of the past catching up to him. And in the end, it did. Justice and consequences. The room remained heavy with unspoken words. Poirot turned to Graves. Mademoiselle Whitcomb has not committed murder, but she has, in her own way, played a role in this tragedy. What happens next is your decision, Inspector. Graves sighed. I'll have to take her in for questioning. Celeste nodded weakly. I understand. Poirot looked at her with sadness. We must be careful, mademoiselle, when seeking justice. Sometimes, in the pursuit of truth, we awaken something far more dangerous. Celeste lowered her head. Lady Eleanor dabbed at her eyes. Such a dreadful, dreadful thing. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Yes, Lady Eleanor, dreadful indeed. He turned to the group. And now, mes amis, I believe my work here is finished. A sombre silence followed. Poirot picked up his hat, placed it neatly upon his head, and gave a small bow. Au revoir, my friends. May we meet again under happier circumstances. And with that, the great detective left Greystone Manor, leaving behind only the echoes of a mystery solved, and a lesson in the delicate nature of truth and consequence. Chapter 7. The Final Puzzle. The thick morning fog hung over London like a ghostly veil, as Hercule Poirot sat in his modest yet impeccably arranged flat on Whitehaven Mansions. A cup of hot chocolate steamed before him, untouched as he methodically straightened the stack of newspapers at his side. Chief Inspector Graves had sent them early that morning. Accounts of the Greystone Manor case, now publicised under sensational. Headlines: Tragedy at Greystone Manor. The deadly secrets of Sir Lawrence Harcourt. Vengeance and justice. Oliver Grant behind bars. The woman who set a murder in motion. A twisted tale of deception. Poirot sighed. Mon Dieu, the newspapers never fail to reduce even the most intricate of mysteries to a scandalous headline. His gaze fell upon a smaller column near the bottom of the page, one that most would overlook. It read, New. Evidence suggests possible accomplice in Greystone Manor case. Inspector Graves declines comment. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, so Graves, you have begun to suspect, have you? But you are still fumbling in the dark. A slow, knowing smile played upon Poirot's lips. For there was one final piece of the puzzle yet to be addressed. The last visitor, a knock at the door, interrupted his thoughts. Poirot glanced at his watch. He had been expecting a visitor. Entrez! The door opened, revealing a weary, pale-faced Celeste Whitcomb. Her elegant composure was gone. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usual confidence had been replaced by uncertainty. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Mademoiselle Whitcomb, I did not expect you so soon. Celeste hesitated before stepping forward. She perched on the edge of the chair across from him. Inspector Graves released me, she murmured. He questioned me for hours, but in the end, he let me go. Poirot nodded. Yes, you did not kill Sir Lawrence, but you cannot deny that your actions set everything in motion. Celeste flinched. I never meant for Oliver to kill him. I only wanted him to know the truth. I thought perhaps he would expose Sir Lawrence's crimes, ruin him publicly, force him to pay in some way. But I never imagined. Her voice broke. Poirot studied her intently. No, you did not imagine murder. But tell me, mademoiselle, did you imagine your own part in this story would remain hidden forever? Celeste's breath caught. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, you have come to me not to seek comfort, but because there is still something troubling you, a fear, a doubt. Celeste swallowed. I thought it was over, but I have this terrible feeling, as if I have missed something, as if Poirot's voice was gentle but firm, as if there is still another secret waiting to be uncovered. Celeste nodded, her fingers gripping the armrest. I can't shake the feeling that someone else was involved, that someone else wanted Sir Lawrence dead. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And why do you feel this way, mademoiselle? Celeste hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached into her handbag and withdrew a small envelope. She placed it on the table. Poirot picked it up. The paper was crisp, new, the address scrawled in perfect, almost mechanical handwriting, Mademoiselle Celeste Whitcomb, C.A.E.O. the Grand Mayfair Hotel, London. His brows lifted. And this arrived when? Yesterday, she whispered, after I was released. Poirot carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, blank except for 4 chilling words. You only know half. Poirot's fingers tightened around the letter. A silence fell between them. Then softly, Poirot murmured, So, the true game begins. The footsteps that led to nowhere Poirot rose and moved to his window, staring out at the grey London streets below. His mind whirred. There was something unfinished about the case, something he had suspected, but had not yet fully proven. Oliver Grant had killed Sir Lawrence. Of that there was no doubt. But had he acted alone, or had he been manipulated just as Celeste had manipulated him? A second figure lurked in the shadows of this mystery. Someone who had remained unseen, undetected, playing a far subtler game. Poirot turned back to Celeste. Mademoiselle, when you sent Oliver that letter, how did you know where to find him? Celeste blinked. She hesitated. Poirot nodded. Precisely. You did not. Someone told you. Someone fed you the information, nudged you in the right direction. And now, that same someone is telling you that you only know half of the truth. Celeste shuddered. Poirot tapped the letter thoughtfully. Whoever sent this did so not out of fear, but as a challenge. They are watching, and my dear mademoiselle, they are not finished playing their game. Celeste paled. But why? What else could they want? Poirot's lips curved into a thin smile. That, mademoiselle, is what we shall find out. But mark my words, this is not over, not yet. He placed the letter down, and somewhere, in the shadowed corners of London, the footsteps that led to nowhere had begun to move once more. Chapter 8. The Silent Puppeteer. A cold drizzle pattered against the window panes of Whitehaven Mansions as Hercule Poirot carefully placed the cryptic letter on his desk. The room was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the small brass clock beside him. Across from him, Celeste Whitcomb sat motionless, her fingers gripping the edge of the armrest as if steadying herself against an invisible force. Mademoiselle, Poirot began in a measured tone, do you understand what this letter means? Nesta swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. That someone else is out there, someone who still has a stake in this affair. Just so. Poirot nodded approvingly. And more than that, this someone has remained hidden all this time, influencing the events from the shadows. What we must ask ourselves is this: who benefits from Sir Lawrence Harcourt's death beyond Oliver Grant? Celeste's brows furrowed. I thought Oliver killed him because of what I told him, the truth about my mother. But if there was another hand guiding him— Poirot tapped his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. Not guiding, manipulating. Consider, mademoiselle. You believed you were acting of your own will when you reached out to Oliver. Yet someone ensured you knew exactly where to find him. Someone who anticipated the outcome of your actions. Celeste sat back, her breathing uneven. Then, Oliver wasn't the only pawn in this game. I was too. Poirot's dark eyes gleamed. Exactement. A visit to Scotland Yard by midday. Poirot and Celeste arrived at Scotland Yard, where Chief Inspector Graves met them with his usual no-nonsense demeanour. The heavy-set detective gestured for them to sit as he leaned back against his desk, arms crossed. You're telling me there's still another player in this mess? Graves muttered, rubbing his temples. Blast it, Poirot. I thought we had it all wrapped up. Grant confessed. Poirot merely smiled. Ah, mon ami, a confession is not always the end of a case. It is often merely the beginning. Graves exhaled sharply. So, what exactly are you proposing? Poirot withdrew the mysterious letter from his pocket and placed it on the inspector's desk. Graves squinted at the 4 ominous words. You only know half. Graves sat up straighter. Bloody hell! Poirot gestured toward the letter. This was delivered to Mademoiselle Whitcomb after Oliver Grant's arrest. A taunt, you see. A signal that the true mastermind has not yet been touched by the hand of justice. Graves frowned. You think there's an accomplice? Poirot shook his head. No, not an accomplice, an orchestrator. Someone who arranged every piece of this puzzle, but never stepped forward. This person did not kill Sir Lawrence directly, but they ensured his demise all the same. Graves drummed his fingers against the desk. All right, let's think this through. If this unknown person wanted Harcourt dead, why not kill him themselves? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Because, mon cher Graves, a true mastermind never dirties their own hands. They maneuver others into doing it for them. The inspector leaned forward. And who exactly do you suspect? Poirot clasped his hands together. That, Chief Inspector, is what we are about to discover. An overlooked clue. That evening, Poirot returned to Greystone Manor, where the scent of aged wood and rain-dampened stone filled the air. The once grand house stood silent, its corridors dark with forgotten whispers. He walked through the study, his eyes sweeping the room as if retracing the crime itself. It was then that his gaze landed on a single, seemingly inconspicuous object, crystal decanter on the sideboard, half filled with brandy. Poirot's moustache twitched. Carefully, he lifted the decanter and examined its stopper. A faint smudge, no more than a whisper of a fingerprint, marked the surface. Poirot murmured to himself, "But of course—" Without another word, he turned and strode purposefully toward the entrance. There was one person he needed to see. Immediately, the unexpected confrontation. The following morning, Poirot arrived at an elegant townhouse in Kensington. He was greeted by a butler, who led him into a richly decorated sitting room. Moments later, a tall, distinguished woman entered, Lady Margaret Harcourt, the late Sir Lawrence's widow. She regarded Poirot with polite curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot, I must say, I was not expecting a visit." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, my apologies for the intrusion. But you see, there is a matter most urgent that requires clarification." Lady Margaret's expression remained serene. "Oh? And what might that be?" Poirot stepped forward slightly, his voice light but firm. "The night of Sir Lawrence's murder, were you aware that the brandy decanter in his study had been tampered with?" A flicker of surprise crossed Lady Margaret's features, so brief it might have been imagined. Poirot continued. "It is a very small thing, madam, a fingerprint, and yet it tells me that someone touched the decanter before Sir Lawrence drank from it. Tell me, madam, was it you?" For the first time Lady Margaret's composure faltered. "That's absurd," she said quickly. "Why would I—" Poirot held up a hand. "Permit me to explain. It was not poison in the brandy, no. That would have been too crude. But what if someone ensured that Sir Lawrence was already somewhat impaired when Oliver Grant arrived?" Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting that I— What? Drugged him?" Poirot smiled slightly. "Oh, no, madam, not drugged. Simply ensured that he was less aware, less in control, less capable of defending himself. A man in a drunken stupor does not react as swiftly as a sober one, does he not?" A silence fell over the room. Then Lady Margaret let out a soft chuckle. "Very clever, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot remained still, watching her. Lady Margaret sighed. "Yes, I poured him an extra drink that night. I needed him vulnerable, but I did not kill him. I only nudged fate in the right direction." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Because you knew Oliver Grant would do it for you." A slow, sad smile played upon her lips. Sir Lawrence ruined so many lives. It was only a matter of time before one of them came for him. Poirot's gaze did not waver. "And yet, madame, you are the one who ensured that night was the end for him." Lady Margaret sighed, standing. "So what happens now, Monsieur Poirot? Will you go to the police?" Poirot regarded her for a long moment before responding. "Justice has already been served, madam, but let us not pretend that fate alone guided this outcome. You are as much a player in this game as Oliver Grant." Lady Margaret met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Poirot turned, moving toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back. "One last thing, madam. You may have played your part well, but someone else still watches from the shadows. Beware, for the game is not yet over." With that he departed. A shadow still lingers later that evening. As Poirot sat alone in his apartment, a new letter arrived, the same precise handwriting, a single sentence. "You see, Poirot, the real game has just begun." Poirot smiled, eyes twinkling. "Ah, so you are still watching, bon. Then let us see who will win, non?" And so the mystery continued. Chapter 9. The Mastermind Unveiled. The night air was heavy with mist as Poirot sat in his study, contemplating the newest letter. The words, "The real game has just begun," were inscribed with deliberate precision, the ink barely dry. Somewhere, in the city, a hidden hand was still at work, weaving its intricate web. Hastings, who had been quietly observing Poirot, finally spoke. "I say, Poirot, this is getting rather unnerving. First Lady Margaret's involvement, and now this. It means there's still someone out there, someone pulling all the strings." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Exactement, mon ami. Someone has been one step ahead of us all along. We have been led through this affair like marionettes dancing on invisible strings." Hastings frowned. But who? If not Lady Margaret, then who else could possibly be behind it all? Poirot stood abruptly, his gaze sharp. "Ah, Hastings, that is precisely what we shall uncover tonight. Pack your coat. We are paying another visit to Greystone Manor." The ghosts of Greystone Manor. By the time they arrived, the grand estate was shrouded in thick fog, its windows like dark, hollow eyes staring into the night. Scotland Yard had left the house sealed, but Poirot's connections ensured their entry. As they stepped into the main hall, Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping across the familiar surroundings. Every detail of this house was etched in his mind. The grand staircase, the stately fireplace, the elegant chandeliers that no longer gleamed with the same brilliance. And yet, something felt wrong. Hastings noticed Poirot's hesitation. "What is it, old chap?" Poirot's fingers drummed against his walking stick. "Mon cher Hastings, tell me, what do you hear?" Hastings frowned, listening intently. "Nothing. The house is completely silent." Poirot's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Precisely. And that is what troubles me. Greystone Manor is an old house. Even in stillness, one hears the creak of floorboards, the hum of the wind through the eaves. But tonight, silence. Too much silence." A chill ran down Hastings's spine. "You think someone else is here?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, and not just anyone. The architect of this entire affair. A trap set in the dark." With careful steps, Poirot led the way into Sir Lawrence's study. The room remained untouched since the investigation began. Poirot's keen eyes darted around, searching for the one detail that would complete the puzzle. Then he saw it, the fireplace. A faint smudge of ash marred the stone hearth. Poirot knelt, examining the soot. "Curious, very curious. Hastings, do you recall when the fire was last used?" Hastings shrugged. "No idea. I suppose the servants would have—" Poirot raised a finger. "But, mon ami, consider. If the fire had been lit in recent weeks, the grate would have shown clearer signs of use. But this? This was disturbed recently, yet the house has been empty." Hastings swallowed. "You mean someone was here after the police left?" Poirot rose. "Precisely. And more than that, someone was searching for something." Before Hastings could respond, a sound broke the silence, a soft creak from the hallway. Poirot held up a hand. "Ah, our visitor has arrived." The study door swung open, revealing a shadowed figure standing in the doorway, the face of deception. Light from the hallway cast long, eerie shadows. But as the figure stepped forward, the features became unmistakable. It was Philip Marlowe, Sir Lawrence Harcourt's personal solicitor. Hastings gaped. "Marlowe? What the devil are you doing here?" The man's expression was cold, calculated. "I could ask you the same, Captain Hastings. Though, I suspect, we are here for very different reasons." Poirot stepped forward. "Ah, Monsieur Marlowe, the missing piece of our puzzle. It was you all along, was it not?" Marlowe's lips curled into a smirk. "I wondered how long it would take you to reach that conclusion, Monsieur Poirot." Hastings frowned. "But why? You were Sir Lawrence's lawyer. You had nothing to gain from his death." Marlowe chuckled darkly. "That's where you're wrong, Captain Hastings. I had everything to gain." Poirot nodded. "Ah, oui, you were more than his solicitor. You were the silent hand behind every decision he made. You handled his finances, his legal disputes. In many ways, you were the real power behind his fortune." Marlowe's eyes gleamed with amusement, and yet, despite my careful control, Sir Lawrence began making foolish decisions. His greed surpassed his intelligence. He planned to cut me out, to name a new executor in his will, a younger, more loyal solicitor. Hastings shook his head in disbelief. "So you had him killed?" Marlowe sighed. "I didn't kill him myself. That's not my style. But I made sure the right pieces were in play. I let Oliver Grant discover the truth about Celeste's mother. I knew he would react irrationally. And Lady Margaret, I simply nudged her in the right direction." Poirot's voice was calm, controlled. "You manipulated them both. Oliver Grant was the blade, Lady Margaret the poison, and you were the hand that guided them." Marlowe spread his arms. "And it worked beautifully, didn't it?" Poirot shook his head. "Ah, but there is one flaw in your masterpiece, Monsieur Marlowe." Marlowe raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" Poirot gestured to the fireplace. "Why return here? Why take the risk of exposing yourself?" A shadow crossed Marlowe's face. "There was something I needed. Something I thought Sir Lawrence had hidden." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what was it?" Marlowe exhaled sharply. "A ledger. One that contained proof of my involvement in laundering Sir Lawrence's money over the years. If Scotland Yard got their hands on it, it would have been my undoing." Poirot tapped his temple. "And yet, mon cher Marlowe, you overlooked one crucial detail. That ledger? It was already found, and it is now in the hands of Chief Inspector Graves." Marlowe's smirk faltered. Poirot stepped forward. "This is the end of the game, monsieur. The footsteps that led to nowhere. They have led directly to you. Justice is served by dawn. Scotland Yard had arrested Philip Marlowe. The full scope of his deception unravelled quickly. Embezzlement, manipulation, and ultimately the careful orchestration of Sir Lawrence's murder. Lady Margaret, though complicit, was spared prosecution due to lack of direct evidence. Oliver Grant, already imprisoned, now had a clearer picture of how he had been used. Hastings shook his head as he and Poirot walked away from Scotland Yard. "I still can't believe it. All this time, Marlowe was the true villain." Poirot nodded. "The greatest puppeteers are those who remain unseen, mon ami. But in the end, all threads lead back to the one who holds them." Hastings sighed. "Well, at least it's all over now." Poirot smiled, twirling his moustache. "Ah, but is it ever truly over? There will always be another mystery, another deception. But for now, a good breakfast, I think. Come, Hastings, let us indulge in the comforts of civilization." And with that, the case was closed. Chapter 10. The Curtain Falls. The city was waking up as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings strolled through the cobbled streets of London, the morning mist clinging to the air. Scotland Yard had taken Philip Marlowe into custody, and with his confession, the tangled web of deceit surrounding Sir Lawrence Harcourt's murder had finally unravelled. Yet, even as they walked, Poirot's sharp gaze remained thoughtful, his fingers idly straightening the cuffs of his immaculately pressed suit. Hastings, stretching with satisfaction, sighed. "Well, Poirot, I must say I'm rather relieved this case is finally over. Quite the ordeal, wasn't it?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Over, mon ami. You think it is so simple?" Hastings stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean? Marlowe was the mastermind, wasn't he? He manipulated Oliver Grant into committing the murder, used Lady Margaret as a distraction, and tied it all up with his clever misdirection. The case is solved, isn't it?" Poirot pressed his fingertips together. "Ah, Hastings, you see, but you do not observe. Marlowe was indeed the mastermind. Of the deception, yes, but he was not the one who struck the fatal blow. Do you think?" Hastings frowned. "But Oliver Grant confessed, didn't he?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Hastings. He confessed to confronting Sir Lawrence, to drawing his pistol. But note, once did he say he pulled the trigger. He only assumed he did, because that is what someone wanted him to believe." Hastings went pale. "But then, are you saying the real killer is still out there?" Poirot smiled ever so slightly. "Not for much longer. Come, mon ami, we must pay one last visit to Greystone Manor, the final gathering." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Poirot and Hastings arrived at the grand estate, where Chief Inspector Graves was already waiting with a handful of officers. The house, once brimming with life, now felt like an empty shell, its darkened halls whispering secrets yet to be spoken. Inside the drawing-room, a small group had gathered at Poirot's request. Lady Margaret, still pale and composed, sat by the fireplace. Oliver Grant, his eyes weary, stood near the window. And finally, a newcomer, James Weatherby, Sir Lawrence's long-time valet, his expression unreadable. Poirot surveyed the room with a quiet satisfaction. "Mes amis, I thank you for your presence. I have gathered you all here because, at long last, the truth must be known." Lady Margaret's voice was cool. "I thought the truth was already known, Monsieur Poirot. Philip Marlowe was behind it all?" Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but was he? He was the architect of the crime, yes. But the hand that pulled the trigger, that was another matter entirely." Oliver Grant spoke, his voice hoarse. "But I thought I did it. I remember the struggle, the gun going off." Poirot raised a finger. "And that is precisely the illusion you were meant to believe. But allow me to reconstruct the events of that fateful night, and you shall see the truth for yourselves." Poirot reconstructs the crime. Poirot took measured steps as he began his explanation, his voice unwavering. Sir Lawrence Harcourt was a man of many secrets and many sins. He ruined lives with his greed, cast people aside without a second thought. And on the night of his murder, he had 3 threats looming over him. He raised a finger. 1. Oliver Grant, who had just learned the truth about his mother's past. He came to confront Sir Lawrence, his fury boiling over. A struggle ensued, but in that struggle the gun discharged into the wall, not into Sir Lawrence. Oliver blinked. You mean I didn't shoot him?" Poirot nodded. "Non, mon ami, you were a pawn in another person's game, which brings us to 2. Lady Margaret." The widow lifted her chin. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot held up a hand. "Not directly, milady, but you were there that night. You sought revenge, a way to rid yourself of a husband who had ruined you. You knew of his crimes, his weaknesses, but you were not the one who fired the fatal shot." Turned, his sharp gaze landing on the final person in the room. "Which brings us to 3. The one person in this house who knew all of Sir Lawrence's secrets. The one who had access to every locked door, every hidden document. The one who, in the end, would have benefited most from his death." A silence fell over the room. Then James Weatherby, the valet, exhaled and leaned back in his chair. His lips curled into a slow, bitter smile. "So," Weatherby murmured, "you finally figured it out?" The truth revealed, Hastings gaped. "Weatherby? But why?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Because, mon ami, Weatherby was not just a valet. He was also Sir Lawrence's secret keeper, his confidant in all things. He knew where the money went, where the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking, of course. But in the end, he was just another disposable servant to Sir Lawrence." Weatherby chuckled. "That's about the gist of it, yes. I was loyal to him for over 20 years. And what did I get in return? A promise of being taken care of in his will? A lie. The old snake was planning to replace me with a younger man, someone more competent, as he put it." His expression darkened. "I gave him my life, and when I found out he was throwing me away like a used rag, I decided to return the favour." Poirot nodded. "And so you waited. You knew Oliver Grant would come that night. You heard his raised voice in the hall. You waited until they struggled, and then you fired the fatal shot." In the confusion, Oliver believed it was his doing. Lady Margaret, hearing the noise, assumed the same. "And you? You simply walked away, knowing that 2 others would take the blame." Weatherby smiled ruefully. "Clever, wasn't it?" Poirot sighed. "Clever, oui, but not clever enough. You see, mon cher Weatherby, when a man believes himself too smart, he often makes the simplest mistakes." Weatherby raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what mistake did I make?" Poirot pointed to the fireplace. "The ash, monsieur. The faint trace of your boot print in the soot. You thought you had cleaned up everything, but even the smallest detail can betray a murderer." Hastings exhaled. "So, it was him all along." Poirot inclined his head. "And now, it is finished. Chief Inspector Graves, you may take him away." Weatherby, his face unreadable, simply rose from his chair and allowed himself to be handcuffed. As he was led out, he glanced back at Poirot. "You're a clever one, Monsieur Poirot. Maybe too clever for your own good." Poirot simply smiled. "I shall take that as a compliment, monsieur. Bonsoir." Case closed. With the final arrest made, the case of Sir Lawrence Harcourt's murder was officially closed. Lady Margaret left London, disappearing into quiet obscurity. Oliver Grant, though troubled by his actions, was released, his innocence proven at last, and Philip Marlowe, his crimes, though separate from the murder, would ensure he never walked free again. As Poirot and Hastings returned to their flat, Hastings let out a long sigh. "Well, Poirot, that was quite the case." Poirot smiled, adjusting his cuffs. "Indeed, Hastings, a most satisfying conclusion. And now, mon ami, I believe a well-earned rest is in order." Hastings grinned. "A good breakfast too, I hope." Poirot chuckled. "Ah, Hastings, always thinking of your stomach. Come, let us indulge. A fine meal awaits." And with that, the case of the footsteps that led to nowhere was finally put to rest. Chapter 11. The Aftermath of a Mind Unravelled. The evening after the dramatic revelation of the culprit, Poirot sat comfortably in a high-backed chair in the lounge of the Grand Hotel, a cup of tisane resting on the small table beside him. The events of the past few days had unfolded with such precision that even he, in his accustomed manner, took a moment to savour the satisfaction of a well-solved case. Across from him, Captain Hastings stirred his drink absent-mindedly, his face still wearing an expression of incredulity. "My dear Poirot," he finally said, shaking his head, "I shall never understand how you managed it. There were so many moving pieces, so many lies, yet you unravelled them with such certainty." Poirot straightened, smoothing an imperceptible wrinkle from his cuff. "Ah, mon ami, the key was never in the movements of the suspects, but in their psychology. What is a crime, if not the result of human nature? Greed, fear, love, these are always at the heart of it." Hastings exhaled. "And yet, for the longest time, I was quite convinced that Miss Lavington was guilty." Poirot chuckled softly. "As you always are, Hastings. You are drawn to the obvious, the overt. You see a person in distress, and you assume guilt must follow. But I see the spaces between the words, the hesitation in a response, the flicker of an emotion swiftly concealed. You focus on what is said, I on what is unsaid." Hastings frowned slightly, but he did not refute the claim. After all, Poirot had been right as he always was. Across the room, Inspector Catchpole entered, looking somewhat weary but satisfied. He strode towards them with the air of a man who had at last filed away a troubling case. "Well, that's it then," Catchpole said, pulling up a chair unceremoniously. "With the confession and the evidence, the case is closed." "Evidence, Inspector?" Poirot's lips twitched. "How droll! You mean the physical evidence, of course." Catchpole gave a dry chuckle. "Yes, well, I admit your method of deduction left us all a bit bewildered. But no one can deny that you got to the truth." "Because the truth, mon cher, was always there, merely obscured by misdirection." Catchpole sighed, rubbing his brow. "You make it sound so simple." Poirot lifted a finger. "Not simple, elegant, a closing mystery." As the conversation wound down, Poirot's gaze drifted toward the large windows of the lounge. The night had fully settled, the lamps outside casting long shadows upon the pavement. Something stirred in the detective's mind, a lingering thought, an unanswered question. "Tell me, Inspector," he said suddenly, his voice lighter but still precise. "What became of the letter found in the late Mr. Willoughby's study?" Catchpole frowned. "The one addressed to Miss Lavington. It was just a letter of concern. He must have suspected something was amiss, but never had the chance to act on it." Poirot tapped his chin. "And yet, mon ami, Do you not find it strange that the letter was never posted?" Hastings blinked. "You mean he meant to send it but never did?" "Ah." Poirot smiled. "Or was he prevented from sending it?" Catchpole shifted uncomfortably. "You don't mean to say there's something more to this case?" Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "No, no, the grander scheme is resolved. And yet there is a whisper, a shadow of something more. Perhaps just a detail, perhaps nothing at all. But always, mon cher, one must listen to the whispers." The inspector groaned. "I was hoping for a quiet evening, Poirot." The detective merely smiled, his moustache twitching ever so slightly. "Then, mon ami, let us hope that no more footprints appear where they should not." And with that, Hercule, Poirot lifted his cup of tisane and took a delicate sip, his little grey cells already dancing with possibilities. Chapter 12. The Unfinished Thread. The golden morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Poirot's private suite at the Grand Hotel. He was seated at a small, perfectly arranged breakfast table, his cup of tisane steaming gently beside a plate of precisely sliced toast. Across from him, Captain Hastings buttered his scone absent-mindedly, his gaze fixed on the newspaper in his hands. "Well, Poirot, I must say, the papers have certainly sung your praises this morning," Hastings remarked, tapping the page. "They're calling it the case of the footsteps that led to nowhere. A triumph of the great Hercule Poirot." Poirot sniffed modestly, but allowed himself a pleased smile. "It is gratifying, mon ami, though hardly unexpected. The world may often fail to see what is right before its eyes, but in the end it cannot ignore true brilliance." Hastings chuckled, modest as ever. Poirot's fingers toyed with the delicate rim of his teacup. "And yet," he said, his tone shifting, "there remains something that does not sit quite right." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" "The case is solved. The murderer confessed, the motive was clear, and justice has been served." Poirot leaned back, gazing toward the window. "Oui, mon ami, and yet I have learned in my long years of detecting that the surface of a case is rarely its whole. Tell me, do you recall the letter found in Mr. Willoughby's study? The one he never sent?" Hastings shrugged. "Yes, but the inspector said it was irrelevant." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, and so we are meant to believe. But I, Hastings, do not believe in irrelevance. If a thread exists, it must be followed. Why was it never sent? Who, if anyone, stopped it from reaching its destination?" Hastings looked puzzled. "Poirot, surely you don't mean there was another hand in all this?" Poirot merely smiled. "A most interesting question." A visit from Miss Lavington. Before Hastings could press him further, a knock came at the door. Poirot called for the visitor to enter, and the door swung open to reveal Miss Evelyn Lavington, her expression both hesitant and determined. "Miss Lavington," Poirot greeted her warmly, gesturing toward the seat opposite him. "You honour me with your visit." She sat down carefully, smoothing her gloves over her lap. "Mr. Poirot, I felt I had to speak with you. There's something that's been troubling me." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Go on, mademoiselle," hesitated. "It's about Mr. Willoughby's letter, the one he never sent to me." Hastings sat up straighter. "You knew about it?" She nodded, Inspector Catchpole showed it to me after the case was closed. It was a warning. He had begun to suspect something, but he never had time to finish his thoughts. Poirot nodded. "And what troubles you about it, mademoiselle?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think someone else knew about it too." There was a pause. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Go on." Miss Lavington drew a breath. "Last night I received a note. It was slipped under my door. No name, no signature, just a single sentence." She reached into her handbag and produced a small slip of paper. Poirot took it delicately and read aloud. "Some footsteps do not lead to nowhere. Some lead where you least expect." A chill seemed to settle over the room. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. What the devil does that mean? Poirot turned the note over, examining the texture. His gaze sharpened. "The ink is fresh. This was written recently." Miss Lavington nodded. "Yes, someone wanted me to read it after everything was finished." Hastings cleared his throat. "You don't think this means, well, that there's something more to all this?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Do you not see, Hastings? The case we have solved was perhaps not the whole case." Miss Lavington shivered. "I have the awful feeling, Mr. Poirot, that someone else was involved in Mr. Willoughby's fate. Someone who has chosen to remain in the shadows." Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. "Intriguing. It seems, mes amis, that the mystery is not yet over." The second footsteps that evening. Poirot and Hastings took a quiet stroll along the gardens of the Grand Hotel. The air was crisp, carrying with it the distant murmur of the town preparing for nightfall. "I tell you, Poirot, this whole thing has left me with an uneasy feeling," Hastings admitted. "What if we arrested the wrong person? What if someone else was behind it all?" Poirot adjusted his gloves thoughtfully. "No, mon ami. The person arrested was indeed guilty, but the question remains, was that person the only guilty party?" Hastings frowned. "You think someone else was pulling the strings?" Poirot stopped walking and turned to face him. "I think, Hastings, that there are two kinds of criminals in this world. There are those who commit crimes boldly, knowing they must eventually face justice, and then there are those who orchestrate crimes from behind the curtain, never leaving a trace." Hastings let out a breath. "You mean to say—" Poirot raised a finger. "We have solved the case of the footsteps that led to nowhere, but we have not yet solved the case of the footsteps that were never seen." A hush settled between them. At last, Poirot smiled slightly. "But come, mon ami, we shall not let mystery keep us from an excellent dinner. The truth, as always, will reveal itself in time." And with that, Hercule Poirot led the way back toward the warm glow of the hotel, while behind them, unnoticed, a single set of footprints remained in the garden path, leading nowhere, and yet leading somewhere after all. Chapter 13. Phoebus, shadowed-hand Hercule Poirot, sat in his suite at the Grand Hotel, staring at the cryptic note Miss Lavington had received. Outside, the waves of the English coast crashed gently against the cliffs, a rhythmic whisper against the unease settling. In his mind, some footsteps do not lead to nowhere. Some lead where you least expect. The words had been crafted with precision. Not a threat, not an accusation, but a statement of fact. Someone, somewhere, had not only observed the case, but had chosen to intervene at the very moment Poirot had A. declared the matter closed, and that no was a challenge Poirot could not ignore. Hastings, seated opposite him with his usual air of restless energy, drummed his fingers against the arm of his chair. "Poirot, I can't help but feel that we're chasing shadows. We solved the case. There's no mystery left." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "And yet, mon ami, does it not trouble you that someone took the trouble to leave a message for Mademoiselle Lavington after all was finished?" Hastings hesitated. "Well, when you put it like that. But what do you propose we do? Go knocking on doors, asking if someone secretly plotted a crime behind our backs?" Poirot gave a slight smile. "No, Hastings. We do something far simpler. We follow the thread that has been left for us." He tapped the note. "And I believe our first visit must be to the most obvious place." Hastings frowned. "And where's that?" Poirot stood, straightened his cuffs, and said, "To the late Mr. Willoughby's study, a room of secrets." The Willoughby estate had been locked up following the resolution of the case, with only a handful of servants remaining to oversee its upkeep. As Poirot and Hastings arrived at the grand manor, the butler, Mr. Darby, greeted them with evident surprise. I didn't expect to see you again, Mr. Poirot," Darby said hesitantly. "Is something the matter?" Poirot's smile was polite. "But of course, mon ami, there is always something the matter when it comes to unfinished business." The butler hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. I suppose you'll be wanting access to the study. Merci." The study was much as they had left it. A dark wood-panelled room filled with the scent of aged paper and pipe smoke. Poirot moved with careful deliberation, letting his fingers trail lightly across the edges of the grand desk, where Willoughby had spent his final days. Poirot turned to Darby. "Tell me, my good friend, when was the last time anyone entered this room?" Darby frowned. "Not since the night you concluded the case. The house staff was instructed not to disturb anything until the estate was settled." Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the bookshelves. He paused before one of them. "Hastings, do you see this?" Poirot pointed toward a slight gap between two books. Hastings squinted. "A missing book. Ah, bien sûr. But it is not just any book that is missing. It is the book that once held Willoughby's unfinished letter." Hastings inhaled sharply. "You mean someone took it?" Poirot nodded. "And mon ami, the question we must ask is why." At that moment, a creaking sound interrupted them. Poirot's gaze flicked to the door, where Miss Lavington stood pale and tense. I thought I might find you here," she admitted. Poirot clasped his hands together. "Ah, mademoiselle, how fortunate! Tell me, do you recall what book Mr. Willoughby used to store his letters?" Miss Lavington hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it was a leather-bound collection of Tennyson's poetry." Poirot turned to the shelf, running a fingertip across the spines of the books. "No Tennyson." "Then, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "we must ask ourselves, who would have wanted to take it?" Miss Lavington paled. I don't know." Poirot fixed her with a keen look. "Are you quite certain?" She hesitated. "No. The hidden hand later that evening. Poirot and Hastings sat in their hotel suite, deep in thought. "The missing book proves something," Hastings murmured. "But what?" Poirot tapped his chin. "It proves that someone knew precisely where Willoughby kept his private writings." Hastings frowned. "That means someone close to him." "Exactament. And there are only a handful of people who could have known. Miss Evelyn, Lavington, and Mr. Darby, the butler." A visitor Willoughby might have trusted. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "There is still one person we have not considered." Hastings sat up. "Who?" Poirot reached for his notebook and flipped it open. He tapped his pen against a single name. The name of a person who had, until now, remained in the background. A meeting with the inspector. The next morning, Poirot arranged a meeting with Inspector Catchpole. The two men sat across from each other, at Scotland Yard, the inspector watching Poirot with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "I must admit, Poirot, I didn't expect to see you again so soon," Catchpole said. "The case is closed. The murderer was caught. What more is there to say?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps nothing, mon ami, or perhaps everything." Catchpole frowned. "You think we missed something?" Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, Inspector, what do we truly know about Willoughby's closest confidant?" Catchpole blinked. "Confidant? Oui." Poirot folded his hands. "A man who had access to his home. A man who was trusted implicitly. A man who might have seen or known more than he ever let on." Catchpole rubbed his jaw. "You're not talking about the butler, are you?" "No, not the butler." Poirot smiled. "I am speaking of Dr. Alistair Merivale." Hastings sat up sharply. "The family physician?" Poirot nodded. "Who better to know a man's secrets than the one who treats his ailments?" Inspector Catchpole narrowed his eyes. "You think Dr. Merivale was involved?" Poirot's voice was calm. "I think, my dear Inspector, that Dr. Merivale may have known far more than he ever admitted." Hastings inhaled. "Good Lord, you think he took the missing book?" Poirot nodded. "Perhaps not for himself, but for someone else." A final clue. That evening, Poirot and Hastings paid an unexpected visit to Dr. Merivale's home. The doctor answered the door, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Poirot." He greeted coolly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "I believe, Doctor, that you have something belonging to the late Mr. Willoughby." Dr. Merivale stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." Poirot took a step forward. "A book of poetry, a missing book of poetry." Merivale's hands clenched. "You see, mon cher docteur," Poirot continued, his voice gentle but firm. "When a man takes something that does not belong to him, there is usually a reason, and I would be most interested to hear yours." Merivale exhaled sharply. "I was trying to protect someone." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, and who, exactly, were you trying to protect?" The doctor's lips pressed together. Then, at last, he spoke. "Miss Lavington." Hastings gasped. Poirot merely smiled. "Ah, now the truth begins to reveal itself." Chapter 14. The Truth. Beneath the lies, a tense silence filled Dr. Alistair Merivale's dimly lit study. The air smelled faintly of old books and the sharp tang of antiseptic, a reminder of the doctor's profession. Hercule Poirot sat calmly in an armchair, his hands delicately placed together as he regarded the man before him. Beside him, Captain Hastings sat upright, his mind racing after the doctor's startling confession. Miss Lavington. The name had emerged from Merivale's lips like an unshakable truth. But what did it mean? Why had the doctor taken the missing book of poetry from Mr. Willoughby's study? What truth had he been trying to conceal? Dr. Merivale sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired face. You must understand, Mr. Poirot, I was not trying to deceive anyone. I was simply trying to prevent unnecessary scandal. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, but mon cher docteur, you see, the covering of secrets does not remove their weight. It only makes them more dangerous. Hastings leaned forward. Doctor, if you've got something to say, you'd best say it now. Otherwise, I dare say Poirot will uncover it on his own. Dr. Merivale let out another weary breath before he finally spoke. It all started months before Mr. Willoughby's death, he admitted. He was ill, not gravely so, but he knew his time was limited, and he wished to set his affairs in order. Poirot nodded encouragingly. Go on. Merivale hesitated. Then, with visible reluctance, he said, he intended to change his will. Hastings let out a low whistle. So that's what this is about. Someone didn't want that will to be changed. Merivale shook his head. No, it was not a matter of preventing the change. The will had already been altered, but there was one crucial thing left unfinished. Something Willoughby intended to do, but never got the chance. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And that was. The doctor sighed. He wanted to formally acknowledge Evelyn Lavington as his daughter. A shocking revelation. The words hung heavy in the air. Hastings blinked rapidly, trying to process what he had just heard. Good Lord, you mean to say Miss Lavington was Willoughby's daughter all along? Merivale nodded. Yes, though she never knew it herself. Willoughby had an affair in his youth, a brief but significant one. He had been deeply in love with Evelyn's mother, but circumstances separated them. By the time he learned of the child, it was too late. Her mother had married another man, and Evelyn had been raised believing someone else was her father. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And what of the mother? The doctor's expression darkened. She died when Evelyn was still a girl. Willoughby felt guilty. He had not been part of her life, and he wished to make amends before it was too late. That was why he changed his will. Hastings exhaled slowly. So, Evelyn Lavington was his rightful heir. Not in the strictest sense, Merivale corrected. The will was altered to leave her a substantial inheritance, but it was not a complete disinheritance of his known relatives. However, Willoughby planned to tell her the truth, that he was her real father. Poirot tapped his fingers together thoughtfully. And this brings us back to the missing book. Merivale sighed. Yes, Willoughby had written a letter explaining everything, intending to give it to Evelyn when the time was right. He kept it inside his book of Tennyson's poetry, hidden among its pages. After his death, I realized that if Evelyn were to find the letter herself, she would be devastated. Or, worse, manipulated by those who might see an opportunity in the situation. Hastings frowned. You mean someone might have tried to use her inheritance against her? Merivale nodded grimly. Exactly. I took the book before anyone else could get to it. I intended to return it to her, but only once I knew she was ready to handle the truth. Poirot studied the doctor in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. "Ah, my dear Dr. Merivale, your intentions were noble, but your actions, they were misguided. For you see, mon ami, secrets never stay buried. They always find their way to the surface." Unveiling the shadows, Poirot wasted no time. That very evening, he arranged a meeting with Miss Lavington at his hotel. She arrived with visible apprehension, her usual composed demeanour shaken by the sudden urgency of Poirot's request. "I don't understand, Mr. Poirot," she said, taking a seat opposite him. "Why did you ask me here?" Poirot regarded her gently. "Because, mademoiselle, it is time for you to know the truth." Carefully, he placed the recovered book of poetry before her. She hesitated, glancing between Poirot and Hastings, before cautiously opening the worn leather cover. A single folded letter slipped from between the pages. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up and began to read. The silence that followed was profound. Poirot and Hastings remained still, watching as emotions flickered across Evelyn's face. Confusion, disbelief, and finally a quiet sorrow. She lowered the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. He was my father?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, mademoiselle. And though he made mistakes, he wished to make amends. He wished to tell you himself, but fate was unkind." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Never suspected. He always treated me with kindness, but I never imagined—" Poirot leaned forward. "Mademoiselle, does this revelation change anything for you?" She swallowed hard. "It changes everything." Hastings cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Lavington, I realize this is quite a shock, but it's important that you understand. Someone didn't want you to find out." Evelyn's head snapped up. "What?" Poirot nodded. "Someone removed this book from Willoughby's study. Someone who wished to keep this truth hidden. Someone who knew." Her eyes darkened. "Who?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mademoiselle, that is the question we must now answer." The final piece of the puzzle late that night. Poirot sat alone in his hotel room, deep in thought. The case had taken many unexpected turns, but he was now certain of one thing. There was still a shadow lurking in the background, someone who had known about Evelyn's true parentage and had deliberately acted to suppress it. The question was who? Merivale had removed the book out of concern. But who had known before him? Poirot's mind raced through the possibilities. The butler, Mr. Darby. Possible, but unlikely. He was loyal to the Willoughby household, but he had shown no particular interest in Evelyn's affairs. A relative of Willoughby's. This was a stronger possibility. Someone who stood to lose a fortune if Evelyn's claim to inheritance was made public. An unknown third party. A wild card, but not impossible. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully, and then a memory surfaced. A single moment, a single word spoken in passing during one of his early interviews. He stood abruptly. "Hastings!" he called out. Hastings, already in his pyjamas, groaned from the next room. "Poirot, must you always have revelations at ungodly hours?" Poirot smiled. "But of course, mon ami, because now I know who has been pulling the strings from the very beginning." Hastings groaned again. Do I even want to ask? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The game, Mon cher Hastings, is nearly at an end. Chapter 15. The Curtain Falls. The night air was thick with tension as Poirot stood before the fireplace in his hotel suite, his hands clasped behind his back. Hastings sat nearby, rubbing his temples, still trying to process Poirot's sudden declaration. "You mean to say you've known all along who was behind this?" Hastings asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Poirot turned slightly, a small smile playing on his lips. "Non, mon ami, not all along. But the pieces, they were all there. I merely needed to see them arranged correctly." Hastings exhaled. "And? Who is it?" Poirot gestured towards the desk where Evelyn Lavington's letter still lay unfolded. "The answer, my dear Hastings, lies within this letter. But more importantly, it lies within the actions of those who sought to suppress the truth." Before Hastings could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Poirot straightened his jacket. "Ah, excellent timing. That, Hastings, will be our guests." Poirot opened the door to reveal Dr. Merivale, Evelyn Lavington, and to their great surprise, Mr. Henry Montague, Willoughby's long-time solicitor. Montague was a short, balding man with a nervous disposition, his fingers constantly adjusting his tie. He looked visibly uncomfortable as he stepped inside. "I must say, Mr. Poirot, I do hope you are not wasting my time," Montague muttered. Poirot gave him a knowing look. "But of course not, Monsieur Montague. You see, tonight the truth must finally be revealed." The unmasking Evelyn sat down, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She had barely spoken since reading the letter that changed her life. Her voice was quiet but firm when she finally asked, "Mr. Poirot, please just tell me, who kept my father's secret hidden, and why?" Poirot sighed softly, then turned to Montague. "Monsieur, you have been the solicitor for the Willoughby estate for many years, non?" Montague nodded. "Yes, of course. And you were the one responsible for drafting the revised will?" Montague hesitated. "That is correct." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And yet, when Mr. Willoughby passed away, no such will was ever found." A silence fell over the room. Hastings frowned. "Wait a minute. If Willoughby had already signed a new will, leaving a substantial inheritance to Evelyn, why wasn't it among his papers?" Poirot turned to Montague. "Monsieur, I believe you have something to tell us." Montague's face paled. This is preposterous." Poirot raised a finger. "Ah! Before you protest too much, consider this. Evelyn's inheritance would have reduced the amount left to others, would it not?" Montague swallowed. "Well, yes, but—" Poirot took a slow step closer. "And who stood to gain the most if the revised will simply disappeared?" Montague's hands trembled. "You cannot possibly think—" "Ah, but I do, monsieur. And you see, there is something most curious about your actions. From the moment Mr. Willoughby passed, you expressed no surprise that Evelyn was not included in the will. And yet, you were the very man who drafted the new one." Montague's breath hitched. I assumed it had not yet been signed." Poirot's voice hardened. "Ah, but that is a lie. You knew very well that it had been signed, because you witnessed it," Evelyn gasped. Dr. Merivale's expression darkened. Hastings shot forward. "Good Lord, Poirot, Are you saying Montague deliberately concealed the will? Poirot nodded. Not just concealed, mon ami. He destroyed it. Montague's face twisted. This is absurd. You have no proof. Poirot smiled coolly. Ah, but I do. You see, Monsieur Montague, you made one very crucial mistake. The night before Mr. Willoughby's death, you visited his house. You were seen leaving his study with documents in hand. Now, why would you need to take legal papers if everything had already been arranged? Montague's composure cracked. I was simply reviewing them. Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur. You removed the will before anyone else could find it, ensuring that the previous version, the one that omitted Evelyn, would remain in effect. Evelyn's voice trembled. You stole my inheritance? Montague turned to her, his expression almost desperate. Miss Lavington, I assure you, I only did what I thought was best for the estate. There were too many complications. Poirot's voice was firm. Ah, monsieur, spare us the excuses. You acted out of greed. Montague slumped back into his chair, defeated. Hastings let out a low whistle. So that's it. Montague took the will, destroyed it, and made sure Evelyn never learned the truth. Poirot nodded. Exactament. And had he succeeded, Evelyn would never have received what was rightfully hers. Justice at last. The next morning, legal action was swiftly taken against Henry Montague. With the evidence presented by Poirot, he had no choice but to confess to his crime. He had burned the revised will and had been prepared to keep the secret hidden forever. However, Poirot had outmanoeuvred him. Evelyn's inheritance was restored. Though the will itself was gone, Poirot's meticulous investigation provided enough proof for the courts to rule in her favour. The morning light streamed through Poirot's hotel window as Hastings paced the room. Well, old chap, you've done it again. Another case solved, another villain brought to justice. Poirot chuckled. Ah, Hastings, you flatter me. Hastings shook his head. No, really, this was a tricky one. If not for that missing book, we might never have figured out the truth. Poirot nodded. Indeed. And yet, mon ami, it is always the smallest clues that unravel the greatest mysteries. Evelyn arrived soon after, a look of quiet relief on her face. Mr. Poirot, she said softly, I don't know how to thank you. Poirot smiled kindly. There is no need for thanks, mademoiselle. Only that you live well, and honour the father who wished so dearly to do right by you. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she nodded. I will. Poirot bowed slightly. Then, mademoiselle, my work here is done. As the case closed, Poirot turned to Hastings with a glimmer in his eyes. And now, mon ami, I believe it is time for us to enjoy a well-earned rest. Hastings groaned. I don't suppose that means a holiday without another murder. Poirot only smiled. The end.